Well, good morning and welcome to our Wednesday morning devotions. This week, we've been taking up the theme of lost, what it means to feel lost or to be lost. I guess we've all experienced those moments when we feel we've lost something of ourselves. Those moments when we feel, why was I like that? I'm not normally like this. Why did I respond in that particular way? Moments when tears seem very close on the surface and darkness seems to overwhelm us. Those times when something that we would normally manage very easily and very comfortably just seems to overwhelm us. And we panic. I can't do it. I used to be able to do it, but I can't do it anymore. Times when our confidence seems to be so low that being shut in and not having to go through the front door doesn't seem quite half as bad as it did when we first had to deal with that situation. Maybe this year, we've known times when we feel we've lost touch with who we really are. For the rest of this week, we're going to look at the parable of the lost son, sometimes called the parable of the prodigal son. I want to suggest that in this parable, we find not just one lost person, a person who loses something of themselves, but three people who all lose something of themselves. So let's begin this morning by thinking about the traditional understanding of this particular parable. The son who leaves home. He's our first lost son. He loses something of himself. Let me read this morning then from Luke chapter 15 and verses 11 to 21. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got up, gathered all he had, and set off to a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to the fields to look after the pigs and to feed them. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.'" In one sense, this parable, the parable of the lost son, presents us with a paradox. It's been a consistent theme throughout the other 2 that we looked at on Monday and Tuesday. The assumption that some are found and some are lost. And what Jesus is doing is he's turning that on its head. Those who are lost actually are the ones being found, and those who consider themselves to be found are in fact those who are lost. This is a son who seems to do everything wrong. And of course, within the culture and tradition of the time, he insults his father by asking for his inheritance, which means his father has to sell off half his land. And then he goes out and he wastes all he has. And things get worse. He ends up in a degrading job that no Jew would have ever wanted. But then he comes to his senses. He realizes that he's lost and he needs to repent. But most importantly, he realizes that he can go home. He can return. And when he returns, he finds a welcome that he could never have ever imagined. Again, here the focus is on celebration and rejoicing. He is the one who is found. He was lost. He had lost himself, but now he has been found again. He has found himself in relation to his Father. And of course, that plays into what Jesus is trying to say, that these are the ones who seemingly are considered lost by the religious authorities. They are the very ones who are returning, coming home to the true Israel, that spiritual Israel of true believers. As we read these verses, it plays into this idea of distancing yourself. The further the Son distances himself from the Father, the more, of course, he loses who he is. Who he is, of course, is he's the Son of the Father. So he squanders not just his inheritance, but he actually squanders who he is. He loses that sense of what it means to be the son of a father. He wastes his monetary inheritance on wild living. Well, that's one thing. But wasting his position as the son of the Father is, of course, way more significant. Looking after the pigs was degrading at every level. But that moment, he realizes that he has no one to look after him. No one who cares, seemingly, about his situation. That's a heartbreaking moment. Looking after pigs is one thing, but to have no one looking after you, what a moment. What an awakening moment for him. The son has lost who he is. He's lost that sense of what it means to truly be the son of the Father. And of course, that moment of sheer desperation and possibly panic leads to a kairos moment. A kairos moment simply is a moment that comes in the midst of a crisis. It's a moment where the choices you make will result either in things getting worse or things getting better. And thankfully, in this kairos moment, this critical moment, this crisis moment, this moment when he's distancing himself from his Father and he no longer sees himself as the son of the Father, a good thing happens to him. He comes to his senses. He realizes that he can go home, he can go back, even if he feels it won't be on the same terms. Or at least that's what he expects. It's not a huge way back to the Father. And of course, the Father will cover a lot of the distance himself. And of course, it's not a huge way back for us to rediscover again who we are in relation to the Father. Our Father in heaven will cover most of the distance himself, but there has to be that moment when we come to our senses, when we realize we've lost who we are. We've lost that sense of what it means to be a son or the daughter of the Father. But in that moment, that critical moment, that crisis moment, that moment almost of panic, we can return. We can turn around. And when we return, and the Father covers the distance to us, he can't wait to get to us, to give us that hug and that kiss, that moment of pure acceptance. Well, the Son realizes that he still is the Son of the Father. He's not some kind of hired servant. He's found himself again. And maybe for us, in those moments when we feel we've lost something of who we are, just that moment to realize again that we are sons and daughters of the Father. Maybe, and just maybe, it's time for us to turn around and go home.